He was seconds away from boarding the helicopter that would change his career, until a little girl in a yellow dress ran toward him, shouting words that would save his life and unravel a secret he never saw coming. It was a bright summer morning, the kind where sunlight danced off the polished glass walls of corporate buildings, reflecting a city in constant motion. Alex Carter stood confidently in front of his office building, his gray tailored suit immaculate as always, the dark strands of his hair perfectly combed back, framing his striking blue eyes. At 36, he had everything most people could only dream of: wealth, power, influence. But today, despite the importance of the upcoming business deal, something gnawed at the back of his mind, unsettling him in a way he couldn't quite place. Brushing the feeling aside, he glanced at his wristwatch and quickened his pace toward the helicopter pad on the rooftop. He couldn't afford to be late, his company's future depended heavily on this crucial negotiation. The helicopter waited ahead, blades already rotating slowly, the rhythmic thump of its engine echoing through the cityscape. As he neared, his pilot waved, signaling everything was ready. Alex took a deep breath, mentally reviewing points of the negotiation he'd spent weeks meticulously planning. Yet, just as he stepped toward the helicopter, a high-pitched cry cut sharply through the air, urgent and desperate, instantly disrupting his train of thought. Turning abruptly, Alex was startled to see a small girl sprinting toward him, her blonde hair streaming behind her like a golden ribbon. She wore a vibrant yellow dress that seemed too bright, too carefree for the intensity of her expression. Her blue eyes were wide with panic and fixed unblinkingly on him. "Please, don't get in that helicopter," she shouted again, her voice trembling but resolute. Alex paused, completely thrown off by the unexpected interruption. He'd dealt with surprise mergers, hostile takeovers, and countless press crises, but nothing had prepared him for a child running toward him with such raw urgency. He knelt down instinctively, meeting her eyes as she stopped, breathless and shaking, just a few feet away. "Slow down." "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice gentle despite the strange urgency gripping his chest. The girl hesitated, glancing nervously toward the helicopter, then back at him, clearly frightened yet determined to speak. "I heard two men talking," she began, stumbling slightly over her words as she struggled to catch her breath. They said they messed with your helicopter. Something bad will happen if you go inside. Please, don't go." Her tiny voice cracked with emotion, sincerity radiating from every word. Alex stood back up slowly, his pulse quickening. He looked at the helicopter, now ominously humming in the distance, blades spinning impatiently as if inviting disaster. Every second felt stretched, elongated by doubt and fear. Could he trust the frantic warning of a small girl he had never seen before, or was this simply some misguided childhood prank? "Where did you hear this?" he questioned, trying to remain calm despite his rising anxiety. "My mom cleans your building," the girl said, pointing toward the towering structure behind him. "I help her sometimes. I was taking out trash when I heard them talking behind the stairwell. They said it was going to crash after takeoff. They didn't see me, but I ran as fast as I could to tell you." He studied her carefully, recognizing honesty and fear mingling in her eyes. He knew people, could read deceit easily from years of experience. This girl, whoever she was, wasn't lying. Alex motioned sharply to his pilot, signaling to power down the helicopter. A wave of relief visibly passed over the child's face as the helicopter's roar subsided, leaving an uncomfortable silence in its place. "Check everything thoroughly," Alex commanded his security and maintenance team, who immediately moved to inspect the aircraft, confusion and worry evident on their faces. Turning back to the girl, he noticed she had relaxed slightly but still seemed hesitant. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Lily," she replied quietly, shifting her weight nervously. "My mom is here too. She might be angry that I ran out, but I had to warn you." "You did the right thing, Lily," Alex reassured her, still shaken by the gravity of what she had potentially prevented. "I'd like to thank your mom personally for having such a brave daughter. Could you introduce me to her?" Lily nodded shyly and took his hand, guiding him toward the building entrance. Alex followed, still feeling oddly off balance by the morning's drastic shift. When they reached the lobby, Lily paused, searching the large open space with her eyes. Her small hand tightened around his fingers when she spotted a woman dressed in a simple blue uniform, holding a cleaning cart. Alex's heart jolted suddenly, recognition hitting him like a physical blow. The woman turned at their approach, and her eyes widened instantly in shock and disbelief. "Alex," she whispered, nearly dropping the cloth she was holding. Her voice was fragile yet filled with emotion, mirroring the years that separated them. "Emily," he said softly, the name feeling heavy yet familiar on his tongue. Memories rushed back, painful, sweet, regretful, filling the silence between them. They had parted ways abruptly 6 years ago, misunderstandings and ambitions driving them in opposite directions. He had thought of her often but had never expected this kind of reunion. Emily's eyes drifted slowly from his face down to Lily, then back up again. Alex saw realization and pain ripple through her expression, and suddenly the puzzle clicked into place. He felt a sharp pang of disbelief mixed with a bittersweet ache as he realized the truth he had been blind to moments before. Lily wasn't just the child who had saved his life today. She was his daughter, the living embodiment of a past he had unknowingly walked away from. Time slowed around them as this truth settled in. Emily's eyes were glistening now, emotions too strong to conceal. Lily looked up uncertainly, clearly unaware of the silent storm swirling between the two adults she had brought together. In that moment, everything Alex had ever valued, wealth, power, success, felt distant, trivial even, compared to the weight of what stood before him. Taking a breath, Alex knelt down again beside Lily, looking deeply into those eyes so like his own. "You saved my life today, Lily," he said gently, sincerity thickening his voice. "But you also gave me something even more precious, a chance to know you." As he rose to face Emily again, unspoken questions and apologies passing silently between them, Alex understood with clarity what his heart had been missing all along. The past, complicated and painful as it was, had led him exactly where he was meant to be, standing here, facing the daughter he never knew, ready for a future he hadn't expected but now desperately wanted. Emily stood frozen, her fingers gripping the handle of the cleaning cart as if it were the only thing anchoring her to reality. Her eyes locked onto Alex, disbelief blending seamlessly with old hurt, confusion, and something deeper, something warmer she hadn't felt in years. He had barely changed, still wearing authority like a second skin, his intense blue eyes exactly as she remembered, piercing and perceptive. Emily's heart hammered in her chest, a flurry of emotions battling within her. It had been 6 long years since she'd last seen him, since she'd forced herself to move on, telling herself it was for the best, for both of them. Lily watched the exchange cautiously, her small face clouded with worry. She tugged gently on Emily's sleeve, breaking the tense silence. "Mommy, are you okay?" Her voice, sweet and innocent, jolted Emily back to the present, forcing her to blink back tears and steady herself. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm okay," she murmured softly, her eyes finally drifting down to meet Lily's concerned gaze. Emily gently brushed a strand of golden hair away from her daughter's cheek, taking comfort in the simple maternal gesture that grounded her again. Alex stepped forward, his voice quiet but steady, cautious not to startle them further. "Emily, I had no idea." He faltered, clearing his throat awkwardly as he struggled to find the right words. Emily noted with mild surprise the hint of vulnerability in his usually unwavering confidence. "Why didn't you tell me?" His tone carried not accusation but genuine bewilderment and pain. Emily took a shaky breath, carefully choosing her words. "You had a life you were building, Alex, a life that didn't include me. When I found out I was pregnant, I didn't think you'd want to know. I didn't want to burden you with something you clearly weren't ready for." Her voice trembled slightly, revealing how deeply she'd carried that burden alone. Alex's eyes softened, remorse clouding the clear blue depths as he moved closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Emily, that wasn't your decision to make alone. I deserve the chance to know, to be there for both of you. He glanced down at Lily again, wonder evident in his expression. I missed so much already. A sharp pang of guilt twisted in Emily's stomach, blending with the years of pain she'd locked away. She had convinced herself that keeping Lily a secret had been the right choice, but seeing the quiet anguish on Alex's face, she felt doubt creep in for the first time. Their private conversation was interrupted by a discreet cough. Alex's head of security approached respectfully, informing him that the sabotage had been confirmed. Someone had intentionally damaged the helicopter's mechanical systems, a discovery that chilled Emily to the bone. The reality of Lily's heroic act finally sank in fully, overshadowing even the emotional turmoil between them. Lily heard them correctly, Alex confirmed quietly, kneeling again to face his daughter directly. His eyes were full of admiration and a tenderness Emily had once known well. You're very brave. You saved my life today. Lily blushed slightly, glancing shyly at her shoes before bravely meeting Alex's gaze. Mom always says we have to help people if we can. Alex smiled softly, clearly touched. Your mom is a very wise woman, he said gently, his gaze flickering back to Emily with newfound warmth. Emily felt herself flush at the unexpected compliment, a rush of old, familiar feelings resurfacing unbidden. Taking a deep breath, Alex stood again, visibly pulling himself together. Emily, we need to talk. Not just about Lily, but about what happened today. Whoever sabotaged that helicopter wanted me dead, and if Lily overheard them, she could be in danger, too. I need to keep both of you safe. Emily nodded slowly, reality sharpening into focus around her again. Her protective instincts surged forward, overriding the anxiety and confusion that had momentarily paralyzed her. Lily was her priority, always had been, always would be. You're right, she agreed firmly, turning fully toward him with determination. We need to figure this out together, for Lily's sake. Alex visibly relaxed at her words, as if he'd feared she might resist or shut him out again. Thank you, he said quietly, sincerity thick in his voice. Let me take you both somewhere secure. We can talk safely there. She hesitated briefly, instincts cautious from years of independent survival, but she trusted him, even after everything. Emily looked down at Lily, who was watching Alex curiously, clearly already sensing the connection between them. Can we trust him, Mommy? Lily asked quietly, innocence and intuition shining in her eyes. Emily squeezed her daughter's small hand reassuringly. Yes, sweetheart. We can trust him. The words felt both comforting and frightening, but as Alex guided them gently toward his waiting security team, Emily allowed herself to lean into the warmth of hope, something she hadn't dared to feel in a very long time. The drive to the safe house was quiet, but not in a tense or awkward way, more like the calm that comes after a storm. Lily sat between them in the back seat, her small hands resting on her lap as she stared out the window at the passing city. She looked peaceful, but Emily knew her daughter well enough to sense that her mind was racing. She glanced across Lily at Alex, who hadn't taken his eyes off her since they left the office. It wasn't uncomfortable. In fact, it was the first time in years she'd felt truly seen. There was no anger in his expression, no bitterness, only a quiet shock that hadn't worn off, and something softer behind it, something protective. The safe house turned out to be a discreet, modern townhouse tucked away on a quiet street, guarded but not obvious. The inside was sleek and warm, a far cry from the sterile corporate environments Alex was usually associated with. Once inside, Lily immediately gravitated toward the couch, curling up with a blanket that had been laid out for her. Emily sat beside her, brushing strands of blonde hair from her daughter's forehead. She hadn't fully processed the day herself, but the need to stay composed for Lily gave her strength. When Alex entered the room a few moments later with a tray of tea and water, something she never thought she'd see him do, Emily felt her walls shift just slightly. They talked while Lily rested. Emily explained how she'd lost contact with Alex 6 years ago, after the relationship broke down under the weight of his work obsession and her fear of being left behind again. She had discovered the pregnancy too late to feel comfortable reaching out. It hadn't been spiteful, she insisted, just self-protective. She was scared of rejection, scared of being a burden. Alex listened without interruption, every word carving a new path in his understanding of what he had missed, not just a child, but the years of fear, sacrifice, and strength Emily had endured on her own. He told her that he would have dropped everything to be there, but also admitted, in a rare moment of honesty, that maybe he wasn't the man back then who could have handled it. He had buried himself in success, confusing progress with purpose, and looking at Lily now made him realize how much of life had happened while he was chasing numbers and meetings. The vulnerability in his voice surprised her, reminded her of the boy he once was beneath the polished surface, the man she had fallen in love with before time and ambition reshaped them both. They moved on to the incident. Alex showed Emily the initial reports from the investigation. The helicopter had been tampered with, the fuel line deliberately severed, barely enough to cause an immediate failure but certainly enough to bring it down after takeoff. There was no doubt, someone had wanted him dead. It wasn't just a technical malfunction or an oversight. Someone in his circle had made an attempt on his life, and the only reason he was alive was because Lily had overheard it. That realization made Emily's blood run cold. "I think she's in danger," Alex said, his voice tight, controlled. "Whoever planned this doesn't know that the helicopter was grounded because of her. They'll be looking for a leak. They might try to find out who warned me." The idea of Lily becoming a target made Emily's stomach twist. She reached instinctively for her daughter, who stirred slightly in her sleep but didn't wake. "So what do we do?" she asked, her voice lower now, filled with quiet panic masked by resolve. "We protect her," Alex said. "I'll increase security. We'll keep her out of the public eye. And I'll find out who's behind this. I swear I will." Emily believed him. For the first time since they reconnected, she saw the full force of who Alex had become, not just a CEO, not just a powerful man with influence and money, but a father with purpose. There was something unshakable in him now, a kind of devotion that didn't need to be spoken to be felt. That night, they both stayed in the living room while Lily slept. Neither of them wanted to leave her side. Emily leaned against the armrest, watching the soft rise and fall of her daughter's chest. Alex sat nearby, his laptop open but untouched, his eyes often drifting to the same quiet rhythm. The silence between them was no longer strained. It was full of questions, of shared responsibility, of beginnings they hadn't planned for but now couldn't ignore. At one point, Alex broke the silence with a whisper. "She's perfect." Emily didn't respond with words. She simply looked at him, her heart full of fear, wonder, and something dangerously close to forgiveness. The following morning arrived gently, with soft golden light spilling through the blinds and casting stripes across the polished floor of the safe house. Emily awoke first, her body stiff from sleeping on the couch, but her mind instantly alert. She sat up slowly and looked over at Lily, who was curled under a blanket on the love seat nearby, her small hand still clutching the edge as if afraid it might slip away. Seeing her daughter sleeping peacefully after the chaos of the previous day brought Emily a moment of calm, but it was short-lived. The memory of the sabotage, of Alex's face when he realized who Lily was, and the implications of everything that followed settled over her again like a heavy coat. Alex appeared a few moments later from the guest room, wearing the same clothes from the day before, his shirt slightly wrinkled and sleeves rolled to the elbows. He looked tired but focused, his expression lined with determination. He greeted Emily with a quiet nod, not wanting to wake Lily. Together, without needing to speak much, they moved into the kitchen and started breakfast. The act of cooking, eggs, toast, fruit, was mundane, but it gave them both something to do, something to ground them. For a man who used to live off catered boardroom meals, watching Alex slice strawberries in silence was oddly comforting. When Lily woke and wandered into the kitchen rubbing her eyes, Alex greeted her with a gentle smile and a glass of orange juice. She climbed onto one of the chairs, her little legs swinging under the table, and started talking about a dream she had involving ducks and a giant sandwich. The lightness in her voice was a stark contrast to the events that brought them there, and Emily realized just how resilient children could be when surrounded by love and stability. For the first time in years, Lily wasn't asking about bills, or whether their bus would come on time, or if mommy had to work late. She was simply being a child. After breakfast, Alex stepped away to take a secure call in the study. While he was gone, Emily sat with Lily in the living room, drawing. Lily's small hands moved confidently across the paper, sketching what she called, "Our new house with Daddy." Emily's heart clenched at the word, and though she smiled for Lily's sake, a storm stirred inside her. Everything had changed so fast. Yesterday she was a single mother cleaning offices to survive. Today, her daughter's life was tied to a man who could command security teams with a single call and had enemies powerful enough to want him dead. When Alex returned, his face was grave. He sat across from Emily, lowering his voice but not his urgency. His team had uncovered preliminary information. The sabotage was likely linked to an insider, someone high-ranking in his corporation, possibly a board member. They were still narrowing it down, but what they knew for certain was that the attack had been timed with the deal he was flying to. It wasn't just about killing Alex, it was about eliminating him to take control of the company. Emily listened carefully, her hands tightening in her lap. She had known the corporate world was ruthless, but this was beyond what she'd imagined. She realized then that Lily's warning had not only saved a man's life, it had prevented the collapse of something much bigger, something that could have had dangerous ripple effects. They talked for hours after that, planning their next steps. Alex refused to send them home, even temporarily, until the threat was fully neutralized. He offered to have Emily and Lily stay with him at a secure estate outside the city. Emily hesitated, unused to relying on anyone, let alone the man she once left behind. But when she looked at Lily, who now trusted Alex instinctively, the decision became less about her pride and more about safety. She agreed. That evening, Alex's driver arrived and helped them load their few things into the car. The ride to the estate was long, winding through quiet rural roads surrounded by tall trees and soft evening light. The house itself was nothing like Emily imagined, not ostentatious, but warm and lived in. The security was discreet but strong. Inside, there were rooms filled with books, sunlight, and windows that opened to the sound of wind rustling through branches. As they settled into their new surroundings, Alex gave Lily a tour of the house. Emily followed behind, watching how quickly Lily had attached herself to him. At one point, Lily grabbed Alex's hand and whispered something that made him laugh, and Emily saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen in years: peace. Real, honest peace. And she realized she felt it too, even if it scared her. Maybe, she thought as she watched her daughter run ahead down the hallway, the past hadn't ended, it had just been waiting for the right moment to begin again. The estate was surrounded by forest, secluded and peaceful, with enough distance from the city to feel like a different world entirely. Days began to blend into one another in a quiet rhythm that neither Emily nor Lily had ever known. Morning started with fresh air and birdsong, followed by slow breakfasts where no one was rushing off to work or school. Alex made time, real, intentional time, for them, setting aside meetings and corporate pressures in a way that made Emily realize just how deeply he was trying to change. He wasn't doing this out of guilt or obligation, he was present in a way that couldn't be faked. She saw it in the way he tied Lily's shoes, in how he carried her on his back across the yard when her legs were tired, in how he listened to Emily when she spoke, even about small things. One afternoon, Lily came running into the kitchen, holding a crumpled drawing she had worked on for hours. She climbed onto Alex's lap without hesitation and unfolded it with great care. It was a sketch of 3 stick figures, one tall with brown hair, one medium with long hair, and one small with a yellow dress. Underneath, she had written, "Our family." Alex looked at the picture for a long moment before reaching out and gently stroking her hair. He didn't say anything right away, but his throat moved with emotion, and his voice was softer than Emily had ever heard it when he finally whispered, "I love it." Later that same evening, when Lily had fallen asleep upstairs, Emily and Alex found themselves sitting outside under the stars, a bottle of wine between them and the kind of silence that felt natural, not forced. The past, for all its damage, hovered unspoken in the background. But instead of letting it divide them, they let it rest. Emily looked at him across the table and saw someone changed, not completely different, but softened in ways that mattered. She didn't know if she could trust the future yet, but she was starting to believe in the present. Their conversation turned to Lily. Alex wanted to be involved in every part of her life, school, routines, even bedtime stories. He asked questions about her likes and dislikes, what scared her, what made her laugh. Emily answered each one with surprising openness, letting him into their world piece by piece. She hadn't realized how much she missed having someone to share the small details with, someone who cared as much as she did. That night, she lay awake long after the lights were out, thinking about how quickly things had changed. 6 years of distance had been replaced by a few intense days of reconnection, and while she was wary, she also couldn't deny the way her heart felt when she saw them together. But amid the peace, the threat still lingered. Alex's security team had made progress identifying the saboteur, and suspicions had narrowed to one of his trusted executives. The investigation was still quiet, kept from the public eye, but the danger hadn't passed. That truth was a shadow over their calm days, a reminder that none of this was permanent until the person responsible was caught. Emily often found herself watching the windows at night, double-checking locks, listening for sounds that didn't belong. Alex reassured her daily, but she knew he carried the same weight, he just hid it better. One night, after Lily had a nightmare and came to sleep between them, Alex reached over her sleeping form and took Emily's hand. He held it gently, not possessively, and kept his eyes on the ceiling as he whispered, "I'm not going to let anything happen to her. Or to you." His voice was tired but certain. Emily didn't answer with words. She just held his hand tighter. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. And for the first time, she let herself wonder what it would be like if this wasn't temporary. What if they could have something real again? Something honest, born from everything they had survived. It was terrifying, but it was also the first hope she'd let herself feel in a long time. The morning air was crisp, hinting at the changing season, though the sun still painted golden streaks across the wide lawn of the estate. Inside, the house buzzed with a quiet sense of routine. Emily stood in the kitchen pouring Lily a bowl of cereal, while Alex sat at the dining table, reviewing an encrypted report sent overnight by his security team. The atmosphere had shifted over the last few days, the comfort of newfound family life was now threaded with the growing pressure of imminent danger. The report confirmed their worst suspicion: the executive responsible for the sabotage was someone Alex had once considered a friend. His name was Philip Rowan, a senior board member with deep roots in the company and a personal grudge that ran deeper than anyone had realized. Alex had known for some time that Philip wanted more control, but he never imagined it would go this far. The report detailed financial manipulations, secret meetings with rival investors, and a plan to remove Alex by force. The helicopter sabotage had been just the beginning. If not for Lily, he wouldn't be sitting here right now, looking across the room at the daughter he had only just met. He closed the file and rubbed his forehead, the weight of betrayal settling on him like wet cement. He had trusted Philip. He had shared conference rooms, deals, and even moments of doubt with that man. The realization of how close he had come to death brought a wave of anger, but more than that, a cold and steady resolve. Emily noticed the change in Alex's expression and approached quietly. She waited until Lily left the room to play before asking what he had learned. When he told her, she didn't flinch. Instead, she sat across from him, hands clasped, and listened. She had always been the quieter one between them, but in moments like this, she became the anchor. "So what's the next step?" she asked, her tone low but calm. Alex leaned forward, elbows on the table. "We set a trap," he said. "We make him think he's won. I'll offer a fake deal, exactly what he's been after. When he moves, we'll catch him." Emily nodded, slowly absorbing the plan. She didn't like the idea of Alex walking into anything dangerous again, but she also knew the man he was now. He wasn't reckless, he was deliberate, strategic, and, most importantly, he wasn't doing this for pride. He was doing it because he had something to protect. Someone. That afternoon, the preparations began. Alex contacted a trusted internal investigator and a handful of law enforcement agents he had worked with before. Everything had to be quiet. If Philip suspected anything, he'd vanish or worse, lash out again. Emily helped where she could, reviewing emails and records Alex forwarded to her, offering insights only someone on the outside might see. Their conversations, once about wounds and misunderstandings, had become a rhythm of collaboration. In many ways, it reminded them of how good they had once been as a team, how they'd challenged and balanced each other, even when they disagreed. Meanwhile, Lily remained blissfully unaware. Alex and Emily kept her world normal, filled with storybooks, drawings, and walks through the gardens. She had no idea that the man who tucked her in every night had once been the target of an assassination attempt, or that the woman who braided her hair in the morning was helping unravel a corporate conspiracy. They both agreed to keep her shielded from it all. She deserved that much. One evening, while Emily was folding laundry in the guest bedroom, Alex walked in carrying 2 mugs of tea. He placed one beside her and leaned against the dresser, watching her in silence. After a moment, he spoke. "You're better at this than I am." She looked up, confused. "At what?" "Life," he said. "Real life. All these years I thought I had it figured out, but I didn't know anything until you and Lily showed up again." Emily gave him a small, tired smile. "You don't have to say that." "I'm not saying it to make you feel better," he replied. "I'm saying it because it's true." That night, they sat together on the balcony after Lily went to bed. The stars were out in full, scattered across the dark sky like tiny pieces of shattered glass. Emily talked about her fears, not just about Philip or the danger, but about what came after. What if they caught him and the crisis ended? What then? Would this life continue? Would Alex go back to his old ways? Would she be left behind again? Alex didn't have all the answers. But he told her this: he wasn't going back. Not to that cold penthouse, not to lonely business dinners, not to the version of himself who thought success meant shutting people out. "I want a life where I see her grow up," he said. "And I want you there too, if you'll let me earn it." Emily didn't respond right away. But when she finally looked over at him, there were tears in her eyes, not of sadness, but of something deeper. Of finally being seen. Of feeling like maybe, just maybe, home wasn't a place. It was a person. Or 2. Or 3. The morning the trap was set began like any other, deliberately so. Alex insisted on keeping everything looking normal, from the way he dressed to the casual way he spoke on the phone during breakfast. Emily watched him from across the table, marveling at how calm he appeared even though she knew a storm was quietly circling beneath his surface. Lily sat between them, humming to herself as she carefully built a tower out of her cereal pieces, completely unaware that the man sitting beside her was hours away from confronting someone who had tried to take his life. The normalcy was both comforting and haunting, like watching actors in a play where the audience already knew the ending. After breakfast, Lily was taken on a surprise outing by one of Alex's most trusted employees, someone Emily had met several times and grown to like. They both agreed Lily needed to be away from the estate, somewhere entirely unrelated to what was about to unfold. Watching her disappear down the long drive in the back seat of the SUV made Emily's chest tighten, but she knew it was the right thing to do. This wasn't a day for children. Once she was gone, the house shifted. Security moved into position, plainclothes agents stationed along the perimeter, hidden cameras activated inside the office where the final meeting would happen. Philip had no idea he was walking into a carefully orchestrated sting operation. Alex had invited him under the pretense of a final negotiation, one that would sign over controlling interest in a new global division, exactly the bait Philip couldn't resist. He had taken it without hesitation, his arrogance blinding him to the sudden generosity. Emily waited in one of the guest rooms with a live video feed on a tablet. She hated watching it, but she couldn't stay away. She needed to know what kind of man had been willing to end a life to gain control, to know who had almost taken Lily's father from her before they even had a chance to truly be a family. Philip arrived looking polished and confident, completely unaware he was being recorded from 5 different angles. He greeted Alex with the familiarity of an old friend, even clapping him on the back with a smug grin. Alex played his role perfectly, casual and warm, offering coffee and small talk before guiding the conversation to the supposed deal. As soon as they began discussing numbers and access to confidential accounts, Philip dropped the pretense. His tone shifted, and the greed beneath the smile emerged. He bragged about what the company would become under new leadership, letting his guard down just enough to confirm everything they needed. Emily watched in disbelief as Philip leaned back in his chair and said with a smirk, "You've done the right thing, Alex. Stepping aside will save your legacy, and maybe your life." Her heart pounded as she saw Alex's jaw tense slightly, but he remained composed. That was the moment the agents entered. Calm but swift, they entered the room and placed Philip under arrest before he had time to react. The look of confusion and then horror on his face was brief before it was replaced by rage. He shouted accusations and threats, struggling against the cuffs, but it was too late. It was all on record. When it was over, Alex didn't celebrate. He stood quietly in the now empty office, staring out the window for several minutes before finally walking out to meet Emily. She met him in the hallway, the tablet still clutched in her hand. Neither of them spoke at first. There was no need. Everything they had feared, everything they had hoped would never be true, had just unfolded in front of them. "I can't believe he would have let you die like that," Emily said eventually, her voice raw. "And smile while doing it." Alex shook his head. "I can. I just didn't want to." They sat together in the living room afterward, exhausted. The tension that had wrapped itself around them for days began to unravel slowly. Emily leaned into him, and he wrapped his arm around her without thinking. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even romantic in that moment. It was something deeper, recognition of what they had been through and the silence of knowing it could have ended very differently. That evening, Lily returned home to find her parents sitting together on the front steps, watching the sun disappear behind the trees. She ran to them with excitement, unaware of the darkness they had faced and overcome while she was away. Alex scooped her up effortlessly, spinning her once in the air as she squealed, then held her close. Emily stood and hugged them both, her arms wrapping tightly around what had become, in just a short time, the center of her life. In that embrace, beneath the fading light of a long day, they didn't talk about Philip or threats or power struggles. They just stood still, grateful and whole, as if everything in the world had quietly shifted into place. The days that followed were unlike anything Emily had ever known, calm, unhurried, and full of a kind of healing that could only come after surviving something deeply traumatic. With Philip in custody and the media kept at bay thanks to Alex's legal team, the weight that had hung over them for weeks began to dissolve. It wasn't gone completely, of course. The wounds left behind by betrayal and fear didn't vanish overnight, but the sharp edges dulled. The world didn't feel so dangerous anymore, and for the first time in a long time, the future wasn't something to dread, it was something to shape. Alex took time away from work. Not just a day or two, but a real pause. He turned off his phone, handed off meetings to his second-in-command, and immersed himself in the life he was finally allowing himself to build. Mornings began with Lily knocking on his bedroom door, asking if she could help make pancakes, which mostly meant getting flour everywhere and demanding the first bite. Emily watched them from the kitchen, coffee in hand, wondering how it was possible to love someone again without realizing it was happening. But it was. It had crept in slowly, moment by moment, and now it was everywhere, in the way Alex looked at Lily, in the way he asked Emily's opinion without acting like he already knew better, in the way he laughed again, softer than before but more real. One afternoon, Alex surprised them by bringing home a wooden playhouse he had built with the help of a local carpenter. It wasn't extravagant, but it had a tiny porch, a mailbox, and Lily's name painted in bright letters across the door. When she saw it, she froze for a moment, stunned, before launching herself into Alex's arms, burying her face in his shoulder and whispering, "You remembered I wanted one." He hadn't just remembered, he had been planning it since the day she saved his life. That night, as Lily played in her new house under the soft glow of lanterns, Alex and Emily sat together on the back porch. The sky was clear, and the stars stretched endlessly above them. Alex turned to her, more serious than he'd been all day. "I spent so long running toward the wrong things," he said quietly. "And I almost missed what actually mattered. I didn't just get a second chance at life, I got a second chance at you. At being a father. I want to make it count." Emily was quiet for a moment, unsure of what to say. She had never expected this. When she'd run to him that day with Lily, she hadn't even imagined being part of his world again. She had only wanted to protect him. But now they were here, and the question that had haunted her since the day they split, whether he could ever truly choose family over ambition, was no longer a question. He already had. "I don't need promises," she said softly. "Just stay who you are right now. That's enough." He reached over and took her hand, linking their fingers together. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of all the things they didn't need to say aloud. They had found something stronger than what they'd had before, not just love, but partnership, shared pain, shared joy, and most importantly, shared purpose. Lily eventually dozed off in her playhouse, curled up with a stuffed bear Alex had given her earlier. Alex carried her inside and tucked her into bed, and Emily watched him from the hallway, her heart aching in the best way. This was real. It wasn't perfect or glamorous, but it was theirs. In the following weeks, they made plans, not just for security or logistics, but for life. They enrolled Lily in a local school where she could make friends and feel rooted. Emily began exploring the idea of returning to school herself, something she'd given up on years ago. And Alex, though still deeply connected to his company, began laying groundwork for a transition that would allow him to work less and live more. There was no single moment when everything felt finished, no ribbon tied around their story. But one evening, months later, they stood together watching Lily ride a bike down the gravel path behind the estate, her laughter echoing through the trees, and Alex leaned toward Emily and whispered, "She saved me." And Emily, eyes full of quiet tears, replied, "She saved us both." And in that simple, undeniable truth, their story was complete, not because the world had stopped throwing challenges their way, but because they had found the strength, together, to face them. This story's ending holds a quiet but profound kind of power, the kind that doesn't rely on dramatic twists, but instead on emotional truth. What began with a moment of instinct and innocence from a child unraveled into something far bigger, a reckoning with the past, the rediscovery of love, and the rebuilding of a family from pieces no one expected to still fit. I believe what makes this ending satisfying isn't just that justice was served or that danger passed, but that the characters chose connection over pride, presence over ambition, and healing over hurt. It's not a fairy tale, it's something more real, hope earned the hard way. And that, to me, is the most powerful kind of happy ending. He came to say goodbye to his ex-wife, only to find two little girls at her grave who called her Mommy, and looked exactly like him. The summer heat clung to the air like a memory that wouldn't fade as Jonathan Blake stepped out of his black car, the gravel crunching softly beneath his polished shoes. The cemetery was quiet, shaded by tall trees that swayed gently in the breeze, and the sky above was a cloudless, pale blue. Dressed in a crisp blue suit, his jacket open and tie slightly loosened, Jonathan looked nothing like the grieving man he was trying to become. His chestnut brown hair was neatly styled, his brown eyes calm on the surface, but underneath that expensive fabric and cool demeanor, he felt something churning. It had been over 5 years since he had last seen Emily, and in all that time, he had kept their past locked tightly away, buried under mergers, private jets, and boardrooms. But death has a way of unlocking doors you thought were sealed for good. He hadn't even known she was sick. The news of her passing had come not from a friend or family member but from a former classmate who messaged him after seeing the obituary online. She had been living quietly in the town where they'd once started their life together, before everything fell apart, before ambition pulled him one direction and grief the other. He didn't come back for the funeral. He couldn't. Maybe he was a coward. Maybe he thought too much time had passed. But when the weight of it caught up with him weeks later, he found himself unable to breathe until he finally got in the car and made the 3-hour drive from the city, telling himself it was just to say goodbye, nothing more. As he walked between the rows of headstones, scanning names etched in stone, he felt time folding in on itself. The last time he was here, they had been picking out burial arrangements for her mother. Now, here he was, alone, approaching the grave of the woman he once promised forever to, and abandoned before their future could even begin to heal. But it wasn't the name on the grave that stopped him in his tracks. It was the 2 small figures kneeling beside it. He saw them from a distance at first, 2 little girls, maybe 5 years old, with matching brown hair pulled into low pigtails and wearing red sweaters that looked far too warm for the summer air. They were whispering softly to each other, wiping their eyes with the sleeves of their sweaters. One of them was clutching a small bouquet of wildflowers. The other was holding what looked like a folded piece of paper. Jonathan hesitated, unsure if he was intruding. But something compelled him forward. As he stepped closer, the girls looked up, startled by the sudden presence of a stranger. Their eyes, big, round, and unmistakably familiar, locked onto his, and something inside his chest shifted painfully. "Hi," he said, his voice quieter than he expected. "Are you here to visit someone?" One of the girls nodded slowly. "This is our mommy's grave," she said, her voice fragile but clear. Her name was Emily. He froze. The world around him seemed to fall away in a blur of heat and stillness. "Emily Blake?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Yes," the other girl said. "She was our mom." Jonathan's heart thundered in his chest. His breath caught. It wasn't possible. Emily had never told him she was pregnant. They had separated suddenly, too many arguments, too much distance. He had never once considered that there might have been something or someone left behind. He dropped to one knee, suddenly aware that his legs were trembling. "How old are you two?" he asked. 5, they said in unison. And with that word, 5, everything fell into place. 5.5 years since the divorce. 5 years since he'd walked away. 5 years since he'd lost more than he realized. He looked at their faces again, at the curve of their cheeks, the shape of their eyes. There was no denying it. They weren't just her daughters. They were his. Jonathan didn't move for what felt like a full minute. The girls stood just a few feet away, watching him with curiosity and a hint of wariness, the way children do when they sense that an adult doesn't quite know what to do next. His mind raced, trying to fit the impossible into something rational. Emily had never called. Never written. Never said a word. How could she have kept this from him? But more than that, how had he not noticed? Not suspected? In all the silence between them, there had been something deeper, something he'd chosen not to explore because it had hurt too much. Now the truth stood in front of him with matching eyes and tiny voices. He glanced down at the grave again, and for the first time since arriving, he really saw it. The headstone was simple, modest, engraved with Emily's full name and the words, "Beloved Mother, Brave Heart." No mention of a husband. No mention of him. The guilt hit him harder than he expected. And alongside it, a new fear crept in. What had these girls been told about him? Did they know who he was? He cleared his throat gently, trying to steady his voice. "What are your names?" The girl with the flowers stepped forward. "I'm Sarah. And that's my sister, Sophie." He nodded slowly, repeating their names in his head like a prayer. "Sarah and Sophie," he said quietly. "Those are beautiful names." "Mommy picked them," Sophie said, still holding the folded paper tightly in her hand. Jonathan gestured softly toward it. "What's that you're holding?" "It's a letter," she replied. "We wrote it to Mommy." "Would you mind if I sat with you for a bit?" he asked. The girls exchanged a quick glance and then both shrugged. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. He lowered himself to sit on the edge of the small concrete border surrounding the grave, suddenly unsure of what to do with his hands or his eyes. The silence felt heavy, but not empty. "I knew your mom," he said finally. "A long time ago." Sarah tilted her head. "You were friends?" Jonathan hesitated. "We were, more than that, once. We were married." Both girls looked up at him sharply, eyes wide. Sophie blinked. "You were our mommy's husband?" "Yes," he said quietly. "A long time ago. Before you were born." They were silent, and he wondered if they were old enough to process what he had just told them. Then Sarah asked the question that made his stomach twist. "Why weren't you with her?" There it was, raw and simple. No judgment, just confusion. He didn't know how to answer without telling them things they were too young to understand. "It's complicated," he said gently. "But I made mistakes. I didn't know about you. If I had," he swallowed hard, "things would have been different." Sarah didn't respond right away, but Sophie looked down and whispered, "We don't have anyone else." Jonathan looked at her, startled. "What do you mean?" She glanced at her sister, as if waiting for permission to continue. Then she said, "Mommy got sick. She tried to stay strong for us, but she got tired. After she died, we stayed with Miss Diane, our neighbor. But she says she can't take care of us much longer." Jonathan felt something break inside him. These weren't just two children mourning a parent. They were two children on the edge of being left behind. "Where is Miss Diane now?" he asked. "She dropped us off," Sarah said. "She said she'd come back later, but we've been waiting a long time." Jonathan looked around, suddenly uneasy. There were no other visitors nearby, no sign of an adult watching over them. The thought that these two 5-year-olds had been left alone in a cemetery was almost too much to process. He stood slowly, pulling out his phone. "Can I call someone for you? Maybe Miss Diane?" Sarah shook her head. "We don't know her number." Jonathan crouched down so he was eye level again. "Would you feel okay coming with me for a little while? Just until we find her. I won't do anything without asking first, I promise." The girls looked at each other. Sophie nodded first, then Sarah. "Okay," she said. He offered a hand to each of them, and they took it, small fingers wrapping around his with surprising trust. As they walked back toward his car, Jonathan glanced over his shoulder at the grave one more time. The questions were piling up faster than he could answer them. Why had Emily kept this secret? How had no one reached out to him? What did he even do now? But one truth was already crystal clear. Whatever came next, he wasn't leaving these girls behind. Not again. Back in the car, the silence stretched between them like a fragile thread. Jonathan had buckled the girls into the back seat carefully, checking twice to make sure everything was secure. They sat quietly, staring out the windows as he pulled onto the road, their small faces full of something heavier than any child should have to carry. He glanced at them in the rearview mirror more than once, his mind moving faster than the car could drive. He had no plan, only questions, only instinct, only a growing sense that something irreversible had just happened and he wasn't ready for it, but he also couldn't ignore it. His first destination was a small diner a few miles from the cemetery. He needed time to think, and more than that, he needed to make sure the girls ate something. When they arrived, he walked them inside gently, his hands hovering behind them protectively, like a father who wasn't yet sure if he had the right to be one. The waitress raised an eyebrow at the sight of him with two small children, but said nothing as she guided them to a corner booth. He ordered them grilled cheese sandwiches and apple juice. He ordered coffee for himself and didn't touch it. As the food arrived, the girls ate in silence, too polite to speak but too hungry to wait. Jonathan watched them, thinking about all the things he'd missed. Their first steps. Their first words. Their birthdays. Every moment that should have been his to witness had slipped through his fingers before he even knew they existed. And the more he thought about it, the more his regret turned into something colder, sharper, anger. Not at them. Not even at Emily. But at himself. For being so buried in his own ambition that he had never stopped to wonder if she needed him, if she had tried to reach out and given up. He cleared his throat as the girls finished their meal. "Can I ask you something?" he said gently. They both nodded, wiping their hands on napkins. "Did your mom ever talk about me?" Sarah looked uncertain. Sophie, always bolder, answered first. "She had a picture of you in her drawer. Sometimes she'd look at it and smile, but sometimes she'd cry." Jonathan felt something twist inside his chest. "Did she ever say who I was?" "She said your name once. She said you used to be her favorite person," Sophie whispered, looking down at her empty cup. "She said you were gone, but not bad." Sarah added quietly, "She said maybe one day we'd meet you." Jonathan sat back, overwhelmed by the quiet weight of those words. Emily hadn't poisoned them against him. She hadn't erased him. She'd held on to hope, even as her life unraveled. He felt tears begin to prick the back of his eyes, but he blinked them away. He couldn't fall apart now. Not in front of them. He paid the bill and led the girls back to the car. This time, when they climbed in, they seemed just a little more relaxed. Sarah even hummed softly to herself as she buckled her seatbelt. Jonathan got behind the wheel and took a breath before starting the engine. He needed answers. And there was only one person he could think of who might have them. He drove to the small neighborhood on the edge of town where Emily had lived. The houses were older, lined with cracked sidewalks and leaning fences. It didn't look like the kind of place where someone with terminal illness should have had to raise two children alone. He parked outside a weathered one-story home and turned to the girls. "Is this where you lived with Miss Diane?" They both nodded. He walked with them to the front door and knocked. After a few moments, the door opened to reveal a tired-looking woman in her 60s. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her eyes widened when she saw the man standing on her porch. "Mr. Blake?" she asked, almost in disbelief. "I didn't think I'd ever see you." "You know who I am?" he asked. "Of course I do," she said, glancing down at the girls. "You better come in." Inside, the house was modest and clean but worn at the edges. Toys were tucked neatly in corners, and children's drawings were pinned to the fridge. Miss Diane motioned for them to sit. The girls went straight to the couch, familiar with the space. Jonathan remained standing. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" he asked, trying to keep the frustration from cracking through his voice. Diane sighed and shook her head. "Emily didn't want to burden you. She said you had your life. She was proud, you know. Stubborn. But I think deep down she hoped you'd find out one day." "Why didn't she reach out herself?" "She wrote you a letter," Diane said. Before she died. I have it. She walked into the other room and returned a moment later with a sealed envelope. Jonathan took it, his fingers trembling. He stared at the handwriting on the front. It was unmistakably Emily's. For a long time, he couldn't bring himself to open it. Diane spoke softly. She loved them more than anything. She did her best. But it wasn't enough. And now well, they need someone. They need you. Jonathan finally opened the letter. Inside was a single sheet of paper, dated just a few weeks before Emily's death. She explained everything, how she found out she was pregnant just weeks after their divorce, how she wanted to tell him but didn't know how she thought about it every day, but the years passed and pride took root. She wrote about the girls, their laughter, their stubborn streaks, how much they reminded her of him. And at the end, she wrote only this. If you find them, please love them. Even if you don't forgive me. Jonathan folded the letter with shaking hands. He looked across the room at Sarah and Sophie, curled up on the couch, sharing a blanket, already beginning to drift off after a long and confusing day. He turned to Diane. I want to take them with me. Not just for today. For good. Diane's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. I hoped you'd say that. Jonathan knew the road ahead would be hard. The courts, the questions, the logistics, it would all come. But right now, all he saw was two little girls asleep on a couch, and the second chance he never thought he'd get. And he wasn't going to waste it. Jonathan woke up the next morning in a place he never expected to be, the guest bedroom of Diane's modest house, on a creaky twin mattress with the sound of birds chirping outside and soft footsteps padding through the hallway. The previous night had passed in a blur. After the girls fell asleep, Diane insisted he stay the night, and he hadn't had the heart to argue. Something about the stillness of that small house, the lived-in warmth of it, kept him grounded. But now, as sunlight streamed through the half-closed blinds and his suit jacket hung limply over a wooden chair, he felt the enormity of what had happened the day before pressing down on him like a weight he couldn't shake. He sat up slowly, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, trying to process everything. He had 2 daughters. They had lost their mother. And they were still in shock, still unsure who he really was. He couldn't just swoop in and take them like some heroic figure from a storybook. Trust didn't work that way. It had to be built, piece by piece. And right now, those pieces were scattered between his past failures and an uncertain future. He stepped into the hallway and found Diane already awake, standing at the stove flipping pancakes. The scent of butter and batter filled the air. She gave him a soft nod, acknowledging both the morning and the unspoken truth between them. They're still asleep, she said, glancing toward the other end of the hall. Didn't say much last night. I think it's still sinking in. I can't even imagine what's going through their minds, Jonathan replied, running a hand through his hair. I barely know what's going through mine. Diane turned off the stove and placed the pancakes on a plate. They're strong girls. But they've been through more than you know. You're going to need patience. They don't trust easily. I don't expect them to, he said quietly. I just want to be there. I want to earn it. They sat at the small kitchen table, sipping coffee in silence. Jonathan stared at his cup, feeling both grateful and helpless. He had all the resources in the world, money, property, influence, but none of that mattered here. What mattered was showing up, day after day, and proving he was worthy of the title he'd never expected to carry, father. A little while later, the sound of soft voices drifted from the hallway. Sarah and Sophie emerged, still in their pajamas, hair tousled from sleep. Sophie clung to a small stuffed bear, while Sarah clutched the letter from their mother in her tiny hand. Jonathan stood instinctively but didn't move toward them. He didn't want to overwhelm them. Instead, he offered a gentle smile. "Good morning," he said. They both nodded cautiously, unsure of how to respond. Diane broke the tension by inviting them to the table. The girls climbed into the chairs beside her, and she served them pancakes with syrup and fruit. They ate quietly, casting occasional glances toward Jonathan, who sat across from them, trying to appear calm, trying not to let the emotion in his chest rise too close to the surface. After breakfast, Diane pulled Jonathan aside. "If you're serious about taking them, you need to get a lawyer. Petition for custody. Until then, technically, I'm still their guardian." Jonathan nodded. "I'll make the calls today. I want to do this the right way." Diane looked at him with a rare softness. "Then you need to start now. With them. They need to know you're not just another adult who's going to disappear." He understood. So instead of returning to his penthouse apartment or his downtown office, Jonathan canceled every meeting on his calendar and stayed in town. He found a local hotel and booked a suite with a kitchen and 2 bedrooms. That afternoon, he asked Sarah and Sophie if they wanted to come spend some time with him, just to talk, maybe watch a movie. They hesitated, but Diane gently encouraged them, reminding them that they didn't have to do anything they didn't feel comfortable with. The girls agreed. They rode with him in quiet tension, watching the town go by from the back seat of his luxury car. When they arrived, he gave them a quick tour, showed them where the snacks were, and let them pick out a movie. He didn't try too hard. He didn't force conversation. He just let them exist in the space with him. During the movie, Sophie curled up next to him on the couch without a word. A small, quiet gesture, but it hit him like a wave. Sarah stayed a bit more distant, sitting on a separate chair with her arms crossed, but even she laughed once, at a silly cartoon moment, and Jonathan caught it and held onto it like a priceless treasure. Later that evening, as he drove them back to Diane's, Sophie surprised him again by asking, "Can we come back tomorrow?" Jonathan smiled. "Of course. Anytime you want." At the door, Sarah paused before going inside. She looked up at him and asked, "Are you going to leave again?" He crouched down, so they were face to face. "No," he said firmly. "I'm here now. And I'm not going anywhere." She didn't say anything in response, but she nodded, just once, and walked inside. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't trust. But it was a beginning. And for Jonathan, that was everything. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that was both unfamiliar and oddly comforting. Jonathan, who once measured time by stock prices and quarterly earnings, now began to measure it in small, quiet moments, braiding tangled hair in the morning, pouring cereal without spilling milk, and reading the same bedtime story 3 nights in a row because Sophie insisted it was the only one where the bear got it right. The suite at the hotel had started to feel less like a temporary space and more like a fragile sanctuary, a middle ground between 2 broken lives now slowly stitching themselves together. Every morning, Jonathan picked the girls up from Diane's house, and every evening he brought them back. At first it was just for short visits, an hour, maybe 2, but soon they were spending the full day with him, eating lunch together, doing crafts at the hotel's little dining table, watching movies, and even taking short walks to the nearby park. He introduced them to ice cream flavors they had never tried and let them choose clothes from a small local store when he noticed their shoes were too tight. He didn't ask for hugs, but when Sophie began giving them without warning, he held her a little longer each time, silently thanking the universe that this tiny soul had let him in. Sarah remained more cautious. She watched everything with the silent awareness of a child who had seen too much and trusted too little. She always stayed a few steps behind, always had one eye on her sister, as if trying to protect her from what might go wrong. Jonathan never pushed her. Instead, he gave her space. He let her choose when to speak, when to play, when to simply sit and listen. He offered quiet invitations rather than commands, and slowly, the walls she had built began to crack. One day, while they were painting with watercolors on the hotel balcony, she looked up and asked him to help her draw a cat. It was small, maybe meaningless to someone else, but to him, it was everything. It was a key turning in a long rusted lock. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the legal process had begun. Jonathan had called his most trusted lawyer, explained the situation in full detail, and asked that everything be done by the book. He wanted no shortcuts. He didn't want to be perceived as a man using wealth to force a reunion. He wanted to be seen as a father making things right. The paperwork for emergency custody had been filed, and though it would take time, Diane's full cooperation helped move things forward faster than expected. She had no intention of standing in his way. If anything, she had become something of an ally, quietly advising him on the girls' routines, helping bridge the gap between old life and new. But not everyone was as supportive. Late one afternoon, Jonathan received a call from Emily's older sister, Rachel. She was furious. She accused him of coming back out of guilt, of trying to erase the years he had missed by playing the savior now. She reminded him of the pain Emily had carried, the nights she cried over the life they were supposed to have. Rachel had never liked him much, and now she saw his return as both selfish and opportunistic. He listened quietly, letting her anger pour out. He didn't defend himself, not because he agreed, but because he knew she was speaking from grief, not hatred. When she finally asked him why he thought he deserved to be in their lives now, he answered simply, "Because I'm their father. Because I love them. And because I won't abandon them again." The line was silent for a long moment before she sighed and said, "Then don't fail them." He promised he wouldn't. That night, he took the girls out to a quiet hill outside of town where you could see the stars clearly without city lights. He brought a blanket, a flashlight, and a book about constellations. They lay on their backs, pointing to shapes in the sky, turning imaginary dots into dragons and ships and flowers. It was the first time he had heard Sarah laugh without hesitation. Sophie curled up next to him as the evening grew cooler, and he pulled the blanket tighter around them. "Do you think Mommy can see us from up there?" Sophie asked quietly, looking at the stars. "I think she's watching all the time," Jonathan said. "And I think she's proud of you. Both of you." Sarah turned her head toward him. "Would she be proud of you?" He didn't answer right away. "I hope so," he said finally. "I'm trying to be someone she would be proud of." Neither girl said anything, but they didn't need to. The silence that followed was soft and full and peaceful. And as they lay there under the open sky, Jonathan realized that this exact moment, was more real, more important, than anything he had ever built before. It wasn't about undoing the past. It was about showing up for the future. And he was finally ready. The following week brought a mixture of calm and quiet storms. On the surface, the routine continued just as it had before, morning pickups from Diane's house, afternoons filled with drawing, playing, and slow attempts at building trust. But under the surface, something else was shifting, within Jonathan, within the girls, and within the town that had once forgotten him. It started with a visit from the family court representative, a woman named Evelyn Marks. She arrived at the hotel room unannounced, clipboard in hand, her tone professional but not unfriendly. Jonathan welcomed her in, trying not to show how unprepared he felt. Sarah and Sophie were in the living room playing with blocks. Evelyn observed them quietly, made notes, then asked to speak to him privately. They moved to the small balcony. She asked questions he'd been dreading. Why had he never been involved in their lives until now? Why had Emily not listed him on the birth certificates? Did he believe he could provide not just financial support but emotional stability? What would he do if the court denied him custody? Jonathan answered each one as honestly as he could. He admitted his absence. He explained his ignorance. He didn't try to excuse what he hadn't done, only to describe what he was doing now and why it mattered. Evelyn listened without giving much away. She wasn't cold, but she wasn't warm either. Just neutral. After the interview, she knelt by the girls and asked if they felt safe. Sarah said yes. Sophie nodded. Then Sarah added, he makes us pancakes with chocolate chips, which made Evelyn smile faintly before scribbling something down. Later, after she left, Jonathan felt something he hadn't expected: relief. It wasn't because he believed everything was settled. It was because he had faced something that once would have made him run. He didn't hide. He didn't falter. That, in itself, was progress. But just as that tension began to ease, another challenge arrived. It came in the form of a letter, slipped under his hotel room door one afternoon while the girls were napping. The envelope was plain, the handwriting unfamiliar. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a formal notice. Michael Carter, Emily's ex-boyfriend and the man listed as the girl's guardian in some temporary capacity after her death, had filed a motion to assume custody of Sarah and Sophie. Jonathan sat down slowly, the paper shaking slightly in his hands. He remembered Michael. They had met briefly, once, years ago, when Emily was trying to start over after their divorce. Jonathan never thought much of him at the time, just another man passing through her life. But now, apparently, he wanted to claim the girls. Diane was just as shocked when he called her. She had thought Michael had left town, long ago. He never acted like he cared about those girls, she said. He barely visited when Emily was sick. Why would he want them now? Jonathan wasn't sure, but he had his suspicions. The girls were Emily's legacy. Maybe Michael saw them as leverage, or maybe he had convinced himself he was doing the right thing. Either way, the situation had changed. Now, it wasn't just about proving he was the right choice, it was about protecting the girls from someone who might not have their best interests at heart. He contacted his lawyer immediately, who assured him that they were on solid ground. Still, it would require a hearing. Testimony. Evidence. And worst of all, questions that would be asked in front of the girls. Jonathan didn't want them to be pulled into another storm after everything they had just begun to recover from. The next few days were heavy. Jonathan didn't mention the letter to the girls, but he could feel their sensitivity returning. Sarah began biting her nails again. Sophie stopped asking for bedtime stories. They could feel the shift even if they didn't understand it. One night, as he tucked them into bed at the hotel, Sarah looked at him and said, "Are we leaving soon?" The question hit him hard. He sat down beside her and smoothed the blanket over her shoulders. "Why would you think that?" She stared at the ceiling. "Because good things don't last. That's what Mommy said once." Jonathan closed his eyes for a moment before answering. "This is going to last," he said. "I can't promise things won't be hard sometimes. But I'm not going anywhere. No matter what." Sarah didn't respond, but the way she shifted closer told him she was listening. That night, after they had fallen asleep, Jonathan sat alone in the dark hotel living room, the city lights flickering through the windows, and he made a quiet vow. Whatever it took, he would fight. Not just for legal rights. Not just for appearances. But for the trust of two little girls who had been let down too many times already. He wasn't perfect. He never would be. But he would show up. He would stay. And in the world they were slowly building together, that would mean everything. The courtroom was smaller than Jonathan had imagined, with dull beige walls and a single row of wooden benches that creaked every time someone shifted. Despite its simplicity, the atmosphere inside was heavy, thick with tension and unspoken fears. Sarah and Sophie weren't there, they had been left in Diane's care for the day, as both lawyers agreed it would be too traumatic for them to be present. Still, Jonathan could feel their presence with him like a heartbeat. He had promised them he wouldn't leave, and now everything hinged on what happened in this room. Across from him sat Michael Carter, dressed in a sharp gray suit that didn't quite match the discomfort on his face. Jonathan studied him quietly, remembering only fragments from years ago, how Michael had always lingered a little too long near Emily, how he'd reappeared after the divorce like a shadow in the periphery of her life. Jonathan hadn't thought of him much until now, and even then, he hadn't expected this. Michael had filed for custody as a known and consistent adult presence in the girls' lives, citing brief moments of caretaking and offering financial support during Emily's illness. His legal team was efficient, presenting a version of the truth that was technically accurate, though deeply incomplete. Jonathan's lawyer had prepared well. She spoke of DNA evidence, of emotional bonding, of Jonathan's efforts since discovering the girl's existence. They submitted testimony from Diane, statements from Evelyn Marks, and even drawings the girls had made, unprompted, just simple pictures of a man, 2 little girls, and a house with a heart over the roof. Jonathan didn't look at the judge while this was being read aloud. He stared at his hands and tried not to break down. When it was Jonathan's turn to speak, he stood, heart pounding, and looked directly at the judge. He didn't use a script. He didn't rehearse. He spoke from a place of deep, unshakable love. He explained everything, how he hadn't known about the pregnancy, how Emily never reached out, how he'd come to the cemetery that day only intending to say goodbye to the past, and how instead, he found the future staring back at him with teary eyes and red sweaters. He told the court what he had learned in just a few weeks. How Sarah didn't like raisins in her cookies and how Sophie talked in her sleep when she was worried. How they both insisted on feeding the ducks the small bread pieces, because big ones make them choke, and how they danced like no one was watching when they thought they were alone. He spoke about the guilt that nearly swallowed him and the grace the girls had shown in letting him try anyway. He admitted he hadn't been there when it mattered most. But now, he was here. And he wasn't running. When he sat down, the courtroom was silent. Even Michael looked shaken, his bravado dulled. The judge, a middle-aged woman with kind but tired eyes, recessed briefly to consider the ruling. Jonathan stepped outside, needing air, and sat on a cold bench beneath an overcast sky. It felt like the world was holding its breath. He thought about what he would say to the girls if things didn't go the way they hoped. How could he tell them goodbye again? How could he accept that this one chance, this impossible, miraculous second chance, was gone? But an hour later, back inside that quiet courtroom, the judge returned and read the decision. She acknowledged Michael's claim, his legal standing, and his limited contributions. But she also acknowledged the deeper truth, that love, consistency, and a child's sense of safety could not be built from mere proximity. Jonathan Blake, she ruled, had not only shown intent to care for the girls, he had already begun to succeed. The court granted him full legal custody, effective immediately. Jonathan's hands trembled as he tried to process what he had just heard. He stood there frozen until his lawyer gave him a subtle nudge. Then it sank in. It was real. He didn't cry, not until he was alone again. Not until the door closed behind him and he slumped against the hallway wall, heart pounding, overcome by the weight of relief. Later that evening, he returned to Diane's house to pick up the girls. They ran to him when they saw his face, and though he hadn't said a word, they somehow knew. Children had a way of sensing these things. Sarah hugged him first, fiercely and without hesitation. Then Sophie wrapped her arms around his waist and whispered, "Can we go home now?" Jonathan knelt down, kissed both of their foreheads, and said, "Yes. Let's go home." It wouldn't be perfect. There would still be moments of sadness, of anger, of longing for the mother they had lost. But they had gained something too, a father who had once walked away but now would walk through fire to stay. And for the first time, it felt like the future was not just possible, but already beginning. The first morning in their new home felt surreal. The sun poured in through large windows in the kitchen, casting warm light across the wooden floors. The walls, freshly painted in soft pastels chosen by Sarah and Sophie themselves, still smelled faintly of clean beginnings. The girls padded across the floor in their socks, Sophie wearing her favorite red sweater even though the weather was already warming, and Sarah trailing behind with a book tucked under her arm. Jonathan stood by the stove, flipping pancakes with a mixture of determination and mild panic, trying to remember which one preferred syrup and which one liked hers with fruit only. This wasn't just a temporary visit or a borrowed afternoon. It was home. Their home. The court had made it official, but more than that, something between the three of them had solidified. Trust that had been tentative now felt earned, delicate but real. Jonathan had bought the house in a quiet neighborhood not far from where Diane lived, choosing it not for its size or status but for its safety, its yard, and the sunlight that streamed into the kitchen like a quiet blessing. For once, the decision had nothing to do with investment or market value. It was simply a place he could imagine watching them grow up. The breakfast turned into a messy, laughing affair, with syrup spilled across the counter and Sophie dropping blueberries under the table on purpose just to watch Jonathan crawl under to pick them up. Sarah read aloud from her book as they ate, and Jonathan listened to every word like it was a song he'd never heard before. It was chaotic, imperfect, and better than anything he had ever experienced in all his years of running companies and collecting accolades. He had spent his life chasing excellence, and now he was learning that joy didn't come from perfection. It came from burnt pancakes and crooked pigtails and small voices calling him "Daddy" without hesitation. Over the next few weeks, the house began to take on a rhythm of its own. Mornings were a blur of mismatched socks and brushing tangled hair, school lunches packed with notes folded inside, and kisses blown from the driveway. Jonathan hired a tutor to help them transition gently into a school routine but kept the pace flexible. He wanted them to feel steady before pushing them into the larger world. Afternoons were filled with long walks, visits to the park, and craft projects that left glitter embedded in the carpet. Evenings were quiet, story time, bath time, and moments that seemed to expand with meaning the more ordinary they were. Jonathan started writing again, something he hadn't done since college. He found himself journaling late into the night, not about business plans or strategic forecasts but about the small things. Sophie's fascination with insects. Sarah's quiet, careful questions about the stars. The way both girls said "good night" with a finality that made every day feel sacred. He began to understand that parenthood wasn't something you mastered. It was something you chose, every single day, with presence and humility. Diane visited often. She remained a steady presence in the girls' lives and a trusted voice in Jonathan's. There were days when he felt overwhelmed, when one of the girls cried for no clear reason, or when nightmares crept into Sophie's sleep and she refused to explain what had scared her. Diane would offer advice gently, reminding him that healing wasn't linear and that love wasn't measured in how many problems he could fix but how many times he was willing to stay through the storm. One afternoon, Jonathan found Sarah sitting alone in the backyard, her gaze distant. He sat beside her quietly, waiting. After a long pause, she turned to him and asked, "Do you think Mommy would have liked this house?" He took her hand and nodded. "I think she would have loved it. I think she would have loved seeing you grow up here." Sarah didn't cry, but she rested her head against his arm and stayed like that for a long time. It was in these moments, the wordless ones, that he felt closest to her. Not everything needed to be said aloud to be understood. By the end of the first month, they began to feel like a family, not just by name or by law, but in the deep, unshakable way that grows from shared mornings and mended hurts. Jonathan knew he would never replace Emily, and he never tried to. Her memory remained a quiet presence in their home, a photograph on the bookshelf, stories the girls shared at bedtime, traits of hers he began to recognize in them more and more. But he had become something else entirely. He had become their anchor. Their protector. Their home. And for the first time in his life, Jonathan Blake understood what it meant to build something not with money or influence, but with patience, gentleness, and relentless love. He had spent years chasing the world, only to discover that everything he had truly needed had been waiting for him all along, in the voices and laughter of two little girls who called him Dad. This ending feels like a quiet, powerful redemption. It doesn't rely on grand gestures or sudden miracles, but instead grows through vulnerability, choice, and the slow rebuilding of broken connections. Jonathan's journey, from a distant, successful man unaware of the life he left behind to a present, devoted father, is both heartbreaking and healing. What makes the conclusion resonate is that it doesn't erase the past, it acknowledges it with honesty and grief, while still offering hope. The girls, too, aren't magically fixed by love, they carry their pain, but they begin to trust again. That's what gives the ending its emotional weight. It's not about a perfect family, but a real one, built on effort, forgiveness, and the courage to begin again.